I'll start that. All right. Well, welcome all to an XCSoar tutorial. Please bear with me. I'm not that used to using this Zoom, but I'll get started. Everyone can see the slide deck? Or can someone see the slide deck?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this is actually included in the in those folders that I shared with everyone, the Google Drive folders. So if you want to go back and you know, after the presentation, you can go back and see everything that was in here. So I'll start with the brief description of XCSoar. So it's an application that can perform navigation, final glide, act as a FAI or non-FAI certified logger, among many other things. It was originally a commercial software that was given to the open source community in 2005, and was originally on Windows Mobile. Most people use it on the old-fashioned PDAs, which you know, aren't really around much these days, but now it's running on Linux, Windows, iOS, and Android. Android's probably the most popular one that's being used these days. It can be used a number of different ways with a touch interface or mouse, or some people, I'll show you later, have built-in panel displays that have custom rotary buttons and things like that, which are almost like the full-fledged flight computers. And it's actively developed by a number of people headed by a German fellow named Max Kellerman. I've been using XCSoar since 2007. I started using that on an old PDA, and now I use it on Android. And back then I used it because it was free, but now it's you know, I can afford more than free, but I still like it because I think it has so many functions, and you're allowed to use it on so many different devices, which is quite a useful attribute to have. So I'm going to go over the kind of main devices that are available to run XCSoar on. I've kind of put it into three categories here. We have phones, tablets, and PDAs, which are probably the most common. The PDAs are kind of the older technology, but I know some people are still using those. But kind of the pros of the phones, tablets, PDAs, their color, they're portable, and phones at least mostly have GPS. Tablets, a lot of them do, and then PDAs actually didn't, but you could add a GPS to them. But the biggest con of those is most of them don't have the greatest sunlight readability. They're not meant to be. They weren't designed to be carried around in the sun. So when it's in the glider cockpit and we have the sun beating down on us, it's sometimes harder to read them. But some phones are better than others, and I'll talk about that a bit later. The other kind of category I have here is the e-readers, which has become popular recently. They're quite cheap to buy, and their sunlight readability is excellent. They don't have any kind of a backlight in the back, so they're also pretty low on power. But most of them don't have GPS, and most of them are black and white. Although that's there's now just recently there's a couple phones that came out with e-reader type screens that have GPS and have color, but they're still pretty new, and I've heard some good reviews of them so far, but I haven't tried them, and before I would go out and buy one, I'd want to hear a few better reviews of those. And the third one is an in-panel. You can either make your own, they call it the Open Vario, or there's a fellow who's making it commercially called Stefan Longer, and his company is called Fly. There's probably a few other possibilities for in-panel type equipment, but those are the two main ones that I know of. So these ones, they have great sunlight readability. They're in the panel, so you don't have to mount them on what can sometimes be a flimsy holder. But they're also permanent, and they cost more than just a regular phone or an e-reader or something like that. So you have to be a little more committed to go with something like that. So just a little more information on the tablets. They're nice and big, but sometimes they're depends on your glider and the cockpit size, but they can be too big for some cockpits. I know one of the guys at QNIM here, he just bought an LS6, and he was using a tablet, putting it in other gliders, but there's not near as much space in the LS6 to get that tablet in, especially the way their mount is. So he's thinking about going to a phone or something smaller. They generally have less brightness than a phone, but it really depends on which phone you're looking at. But for the high-end tablets and high-end phones, usually the phones will be better brightness, screen brightness, and easier to see in the sun. And then it seems about 50-50 with tablets or something like that for which ones have GPS or not. For the club pilots who are wanting to bring their device around to different gliders, it's certainly a lot easier if you just have an inbuilt GPS, and you don't have to have an outside GPS. I think at SOSA, maybe somebody can correct me here, that you guys have a Bluetooth connection to your gliders. So
or many of them, yes.
For many of them, so that's a nice thing to have. So you don't necessarily need the GPS, but it's I certainly like to have it on my device, just in case you're in something that doesn't have that. Jump into K21 or something like that, and you want to use it. So yeah, phones, I think I've already covered most of that. They're pretty bright. Pretty much all phones have GPSs inside them. And I find them, especially the newer style phones, they're usually 5 to 6 inches screen, and I find that pretty good to fit in the cockpit as well. I'll move on here. And then e-readers, I said they have the excellent readability, but you do have to have an external GPS, and most of them don't have Bluetooth, so it has to be either have to hack into it and wire some things in there, or have an external device on the USB port. So I think I see some questions coming in. Okay, nothing for this. And it's the basic ways that XCSoar can be mounted. And I understand at SOSA, there's ball mounts on some of the gliders as well, which I believe they're RAM mounts. So that's kind of a nice feature as compared to a suction mount, which is one that I use quite often if I'm in other gliders. Suction mounts aren't quite as solid. There's a good quality RAM suction mount that works quite well, and has, in my experience, it's only fallen off while I was flying in Cowley and Wave, climbing up high. That pressure difference and the temperature difference, I think, made it fall off. But other than that, flying in normal kind of thermal conditions, I've never had it fall off with a RAM suction cup. They're a little bit pricier than the things you can get off the shelf in Canadian Tire and stuff like that, but I think they're worth it. And of course, there's an on-panel mount, which is, more for your own glider if you want to do that. Takes up a lot of space on the panel, but it's usually one of the more sturdy mounts. Oh, I missed something here. Okay, so into the more hands-on part. Hopefully you have a device in front of you because it'll help learning the stuff. This, I'm kind of expecting there'll be questions along the way, so I guess you can either unmute yourself or throw it into the chat, and I will try to answer as best as I can. So yeah, the first, if you haven't already done so, and it's going to be a quick thing about installing XCSoar. Now this is on an Android device. If you're using something like an e-reader, it's a little more complicated. You have to pull out the SD card of it and flash it with a different thing, but with the XCSoar program. So it's a little more complicated, but this is the more simple way of doing it with Android devices. So we'll open up the Play Store app, search for XCSoar, and pick the blue XCSoar. That's just the common XCSoar application. There are a couple other ones. There's probably even more right now. I can't remember now, but unless you know that you really need the other ones, just pick the blue normal XCSoar. Install it, hit the install. Then after it's installed, once you open XCSoar, it will create on your phone an XCSoar folder. So I put in the invitation for this some quick instructions on how to install from Android, which I realized after is probably the harder way to do it. Probably the easier way to do it is to just plug your device into a computer, and you can pull up folders just like you would on any other folder, any other like a USB device, and drag and drop folder files into the XCSoar data folder on your phone or your device. And yeah, here's a quick description of, I wrote this in the invitation of, you can also do this all on Android on your device by downloading a file manager, and basically, I couldn't put it there. When you download files on an Android device, they usually go to your default downloads folder, and then you'll need to use a file manager to select those files and then move them to your XCSoar data folder. So I think I saw a question come up. I'll just check there. Asking about a PC to Samsung S4. Some of the Android phones, when you'll get a notification when you plug them into your PC, and it'll say, do you want to drag files from this device? And you just click yes. So that might be what you're asking. But otherwise, I don't want to get too deep into specific devices because we could be here all night if I do that. So I'm just gonna...
That's all right, Chris. I was just trying to use an old phone, but that's fine. I'll just go use my new phone. There's some weird trick on the sound on the old S4, but that's fine. I'll just put everything on the new phone.
Okay. Oops. So the different file types. So there's DAT, CUP, the Xander file, Aussie Explorer, but the two common ones are DAT and CUP for waypoints. Now, if you've been to the Worldwide Storing Term Point Exchange, I say that if you download the PDF, there'll be a clickable link there that you can go straight to the Worldwide Storing Term Point Exchange. Otherwise, you've probably grabbed one from my Google Drive folders that I shared with the invitation. Same with Airspace. There's two different files that XCSoar takes, SUA and OpenAir. Now on the Worldwide Storing Term Point Exchange, the OpenAir sometimes, I think the suffix is .air, and if you just switch that to .text, then it'll work normally for those files. But I just recently had a kind of a winter project of creating Canadian airspace. I didn't really like the ones that were on the Worldwide Soaring Token Exchange. More to do in Alberta with some of the airways. They weren't created properly, so I made a program to make airspace. So I'm updating it on the Proving Grounds website. The Canadian airspace gets updated every 56 days, so I'm aiming to 8 weeks. I'm aiming to update it every single iteration of it. So you can go to the Proving Grounds website. That's it. It's applicable link on the PDF. So there's also airspace available at Worldwide Soaring Token Exchange. If you're going other destinations, especially the US, or going to a contest, you might want the more specific airspace to that contest. And then the maps. So this is the base map. So you have elevation data and also topography data, and then rivers and cities and things like that. It's available on the XCSoar website. There is a map generator, so you can make your own map of given dimensions, and then they also have a bunch of pre-made maps. So into the initial setup. So I'll have you all open XCSoar. For this, we're just going to use Sim. So there's two different modes when you first open up XCSoar. The Sim and the Fly. The Fly is obviously going to use that, and that actually will use your GPS position to display where you're at. Where the Sim will basically use the waypoint file that you put in there, and we can also say when we're not flying, you can drag around the symbol and well, simulate that you're flying basically. So yeah, choose Sim, and if you haven't set up anything, you're gonna come up to a blank screen, and no waypoints or anything like that. So just gonna do the initial setup of loading your waypoints, airspace, and maps. So I'm gonna start by opening the menu. So double tap anywhere on the screen, and see these gray boxes should come up. And click the config button. Now, I found the last time I did this tutorial, some people already had maps and things loaded up, and when they click the screen, I think that might actually be my next. No, it's not there. When they click the screen, it comes up information about a waypoint or an airspace or whatever it is. So really, the only thing you can do is click close on that and try double clicking again. Some devices, I have a Dell Streak, and that actually has a dedicated menu button, which is a nice to have feature. So instead of trying to double click every time, you just hit the menu button and then these boxes come up. But the more modern Android devices went away with that, so you just have to double click. Yeah, so we'll hit the config tile. Then another box comes up. We'll hit system, and that'll bring us to the system config. And you can touch the site files button there, and should bring us to this screen. So we'll start with the, I can't read it right here, but what's the top one? The maps, I guess it is. Map database. So click the map database, and oh, I guess I didn't get any. We'll choose. This is all set up for Alberta. I made this presentation for Alberta for the last couple of years at CUNYM, but you want to click the. I can't remember what that file is now, but I think it's Southern Ontario or something like that. But it's a .xcm file for Ontario. And for those Alberta people, you can click the Alberta Rockies XCM and load it in there. And similar with the waypoints, we'll click waypoints and choose, yeah, this is a different thing. I'm just going to look at the files that I have here. So for QNIM, yeah, it's blck.nm.cup. And then for SOSA, this is a PANM cup file, so 3pnr2-nm.cup. We'll load those in, or if you have another waypoint file, whatever. Let me get back here. And then the airspaces will be CA282 .text, are the ones that I put in the Google Drive folder, or if you have any other airspace files. So this is pretty important, so hope you all have that step. If you don't, please ask a question quickly.
So for SOSA, we're going to use the SOSA files, CAN Southwest Ontario, waypoints is Canada Cup, and the airspace is South Ontario _2009 SUA. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's not the ones that I gave, but I think those will work. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That's as you referred earlier. This is what's on my Android right now. So.
Okay. I think that should work for what we're doing here.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. And I quickly, so just hit close at the bottom right of the screen on this screen. That'll take us back to this menu. Then we'll go to setup and we'll throw the units in here quickly. You can just use one of the quick settings. The Australia is pretty much what we use. I think they use a different pressure unit. I think they use, well, not inches, they use something else. But other than that, I think it's pretty much what we use in Canada here with kilometers. And of course, you might have your own preference of whether you'd rather have knots or feet per minute or whatever, but it's all very customizable there. Oh, I should mention, to get this full screen, you have to click the expert check mark at the bottom left. I'll give you guys a second to set that up. But for right now, the real important one is to have distance in kilometers, because we're going to set up a task in kilometers in a minute.
Sorry, Chris?
Yep.
Hi, sorry, this is Phil here. Sorry, I'm just a little bit behind because I think I got confused by your instructions. I didn't think you wanted us to copy the files from the PC over until you started the presentation. So, yeah, that's what it sounded like, because it said you'll do this in the presentation. Anyways, I've copied them. I'm just trying to catch up. So just give me a moment. I'm here looking at your PDF.
And I clicked close and started loading the terrain file, so I'm not able to look at that menu right now.
Okay, well, I'll give you guys a second to get back to that.
Yeah, so I'm going to use your PDF, which you sent, to try and get to where you're currently at. So just give me 2 minutes to get there then.
Okay.
Hopefully, that's all it'll take me. Now I just got to find your PDF again.
I also had XCSoar TE, and I don't have enough memory to load another version of XCSoar at the moment.
That's the TE would be fine. That'll work fine for this. It's essentially the same.
System, and then system. And what's next? Site files. Database. So for this, we can use any map database, I guess, right? I mean, because you provided stuff for Alberta and SOSA, southwestern Ontario, but I happen to have some for southeast Ontario, so I could use those.
Yeah, that'll work fine.
Okay.
Now later on, I'm going to set up a task, and well, the one I have in here is actually old, anyways, for Alberta. But I'm going to set up the SOSA racetrack for everybody. But you can use any points you want, really. Just
so you can only have one map database at a time, I guess.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I think where you were is you had people load the map database and the waypoints and the airspaces, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So I think I'll be with you in a few minutes. I'll just load stuff from locally then.
And how do you
Okay.
how did you get to units?
Where are you on the main screen right now?
I certainly can be.
Well, it doesn't really matter. I guess if you're in, let's say like the system config that looks like this.
Okay, so config.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So go to setup. There you go, setup, and then units.
Okay. Got it.
And then yeah, you can set them all up there. I'd say if you want to quickly set them up, the preset Australia is pretty close to what we use in Canada, with the exception of the pressures in inches of mercury, which doesn't affect much unless you're hooking up to other devices. But yeah. Okay. So yeah, make sure you have distance in kilometers.
Sorry, Chris. So I got the site files, and then the next thing in your presentation says, go to configuration setup in the unit. So how do I get back to the menu? I guess I gotta go back to config. And,
Here, I'm gonna, this is one of the nice things about having this. So if you're on this screen, I hope you guys can see this one, right? This is the live.
okay.
Can you see I'm going through the menus here. So system again, and then we're at site files, or sorry, yeah, we're doing the units right now. So setup, down to units. And then yeah, throw the expert mode on.
Yeah,
and
gotcha.
Do the quick Australian, and then oops.
That's under preset. You set that.
Yeah, under the presets, and that gets us mostly of what we use in Canada. This is actually this one that I have on my computer. It's the Windows version, and it doesn't have everything that the Android has, I don't believe. So I think it's just missing some things, but it should be close enough for these examples. Anyways, so we set up our units. We'll hit close at the bottom right and close it again, which will take us back to our map screen. So you should have some sort of a map, airspace, and maybe some waypoints on your screen now. This is for Alberta, but it'll look similar in SOSA. Actually, you know what? I'm going to very quickly do this with you guys so I'm caught up later. I'll do SOSA and airspace. All right, so well, I'll show this one. If you're in Ontario, then it probably look more like this. Alberta will look like this. So we'll get into the general use section. So the very first thing I'll get you to do is just touch the screen somewhere once. And you'll probably, if you're touching an waypoint or an airway or airspace of some sort, this type of a dialog should pop up. This has a bunch of functions that you can do. One of the most important ones is if you have a waypoint, you can just click on it and then hit go to. But I find when you try to hit the menu, this is clicking the screen once, where menu is clicking it twice. So sometimes this one comes up accidentally. So if this comes up, just hit close at the bottom and try double clicking somewhere on the screen again. and we're going to our menus here. What are we starting with? Oh, that's, yeah, we've already gotten to the menus, so I'll skip over that. Zooming, so there's a few different ways to zoom with XCSoar. One is to just flick your screen up. And I'll do this on this one. So if I just go, actually that's going down. So that's zooming out. And then swiping your finger up is to zoom in. Also, if your device has a volume rocker, sometimes that will zoom in and out as well, which is sometimes a bit nicer when you're flying along to have a physical button. And then, yeah, there's the third way of doing this. I'll do this on the screen. You see, I keep hitting that maps element thing and it comes up. So I double click, I hit display, and then you can go zoom in, zoom out with those buttons. So panning. Now the easiest way to pan is if you have a touch device, like an Android phone or tablet or something like that, use your 2 fingers and just drag around the screen. I can't do it on this demo version, the Windows version, that doesn't allow it on the Windows version. So the second way of doing it is to bring up the menu and then click display. And then you can hit pan on. And then you can kind of click and drag around as you'd like. When you're done panning around, you just hit the pan off and you're back to the normal map screen. All right. And we have a couple map pages. So if you just flick your screen from right or to the left, it'll go through a few different map screens options. I think the default is just the regular map with the info boxes on the top and bottom, and then a map screen with no info boxes at the top or bottom, just a pure map screen. You can change the options on that, and we'll get to that later on in the more advanced options settings.
Excuse me, Chris.
Yeah.
So you talked about the swiping left or right. You should get different maps.
Well, not a different map, but a different screen, basically. So I'll demonstrate on this one. See, if I swipe to the left, swipe to the right, you basically lose your info boxes top and bottom. That's the default setup for XCSoar.
Oh, I see. Okay, the map stays there, but you get, I see. Gotcha.
Yeah.
The info.
Yeah, sorry, that wasn't clear. Oops.
Or what I guess menu items or whatever it is, or info boxes that they call them, right?
The info boxes, yeah, that's what they're called, yeah. So I think, yeah, we're gonna go into build the task now. So we'll get to your menu by double tapping the screen. And then click nav, the nav box in the bottom left, and then task. And we'll get to our task manager. And so yeah, right now we're gonna just throw in the, I'm gonna do an example of the SOSA racetrack. But if you have a different waypoint file in, just pick some waypoints that work for you. So we're gonna hit the add turn point. We're gonna get this kind of a filter screen. Actually, I'm gonna do this along with you on this one. Nav task, add points. So actually, not sure why that one came up with a bunch of airports here, but the first one for us is going to be Rockton. So I'm going to select that as our start point. So basically, you can just double click on it, or you click it and a box comes up. And then our first one on the racetrack, if I remember correctly, is Cambridge, which I think is, oh, I know this is doing this. I put the wrong file in here, but well, this will work for here. Cambridge is number 11. Now, if you have a bigger file, I just realized I put the proving grounds waypoints. Actually, I'm just going to change that. Just give me a second here. Yeah. I'm going to pick the Pan American waypoint file instead. They actually would have been easier the other way, but I just want you guys to see what this looks like otherwise. So yeah, this one comes up with a big list. You can either scroll down, find 58 Rockton, or the other way, you can go to name, click on that box, and start typing in 58, and then press OK, and basically gives you all the options here. Let's click on Rockton. For some reason, this version of XCSoar is cutting off the names a little bit there. But next point, we'll throw in Cambridge, number 11. And it's pretty simple. Just add turn point and then click on the turn point that you're selecting. So next one, Reedsfield. So that's number 57. Hit select. The next one is Peter's Corners, which number is that? 53. And then back to Rockton. I'll do it the name way again, just to show you all so you see it. So just click on 58. Now, it's basically, when you type in 58, it'll show all the letters that are after 58. And since Rockton would be the only turn point name number, or I guess with the 58 preceding it, R is your only option, and you'll see you'll eventually only be able to spell Rockton, but then it'll come up here and you just select it. So get back to the presentation here. We've added our turn points, added all of them in there. The last thing you want to do is tap the last Rockton or QNIM or whatever your last turn point is there, and we're going to make it a finish. You have to specify that to XCSoar every time you make a task. I'm not sure why, but I'm sure it's some sort of logic in the programming of making the task. Next thing we're going to do.
Will you make it finish or finish line?
Does it ask you there? I think for right now, you click on it in this screen, and you hit make finish at the bottom, and then it knows that Rockton's your last turn point.
Where does it show make finish?
Well, I've got rid of it now. Let me just remove that, and I'll put it back.
The bottom.
Yeah, it's at the bottom. So I'll put this in here, Rockton. So now it's not a finish yet. So if you look at the bottom, there's edit point, make finish, and all that. Just click that, and you have your finish. So the next step, we're gonna change the waypoint radiuses. So we'll start with Rockton, and the common for the proving grounds waypoints, they're all 2 kilometers for Rockton at least. So we're gonna just click on the Rockton, and then there's this little box that says radius here, 1 kilometer. You click on that, and then you come down here and select 2K. And that's it for the start. So you can either hit close and go back to the main screen, or if you're on the Rockton turn point, you can go to the bottom of the screen and hit the arrow, which takes you to the next turn point, which is Cambridge. So we're going to switch that one to 2 kilometers as well. And then we'll do that for all the turn points. So click next, 2 kilometers for that reads. And
I actually had a question about that.
go ahead.
In the proving ground, it says a 2-kilometer cylinder. Isn't the proving ground like the diameter 2 kilometers? So shouldn't the radius be 1 kilometer?
No, I'm pretty sure it is. It's not. I don't think it's diameter. I should know this, but
Mine says radius when I'm filling it in.
this
Yeah,
is on
that's what I'm
XCSoar,
saying. It says
but-
radius here as 1 kilometer. But
No,
the
I'm pretty-
proving ground has a cylinder of 2 kilometers.
Yeah, it's a cylinder. It's radius 2 kilometers. I think that probably could be clearer. I will bring that back and make sure that's a little bit clearer. But it's a radius of 2 kilometers.
Because we also had that problem with our at Radio Valley at Cars. It was the same thing. This winter, I was creating these tasks for Condor, and there was a bunch of confusion on.
Now,
you know,
Rio Valley.
a 2 kilometer cylinder. I assumed that meant 1 kilometer radius.
Yeah. I think most soaring, that's kind of the common term. So it certainly I think we should be clear on the proving grounds. So I'll bring that back to them. But yeah, usually when you say the cylinder, it's a radius, not a diameter. But at Rideau Valley, I believe, I could be wrong. I haven't looked at that one for a while, but I think Willie asked for 1 kilometer turn points there. So it might be 1 kilometer radius, but
Okay.
that's something I'd have to double check. I haven't
All
looked
right.
at in a bit.
I'll go with that assumption for now.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's finish up here, 2 kilometer cylinders, and then close. Let's see where we are.
What about the finish?
2 kilometers as well. Everything's 2 kilometers in the proving grounds. To make it simple. So in this example, actually, I was doing starts and FAI quadrants, but we've changed 2 kilometer cylinders for all that. Another thing you can do with the task open here, you click Manage at the top. We can save the file for later. So let's all click Save, and I'm going to write this down as SOSA PG for proving grounds, and then we'll call it the racetrack. Or you can put 1 or whatever you feel fit. You hit OK. And now it's saved. I think my next slide here is, oh, that's not it. I got lost here. 1 second. That's manager. There we are, save task. So if you want to open a task later, you just go to Browse. It's not in there. I have a couple others in here, but here's the SOSA PG racetrack. We can click that, hit load, and it will load into our main task here. So it's good to do the proving grounds tasks if you're planning to do those at your club. Or even if you're not planning to do that and you're sitting around in the sky and it's fun to just do one of those tasks.
Does that 2 kilometer radius also go for the triangle 1 and triangle 2 as well?
Yeah, for all those SOSA ones, pretty much, I think all of the ones in Canada, except I'm pretty sure Radio Valley asked for 1 kilometer, but yeah, for all the other proving grounds, it's 2 kilometers. I think Rideau Valley asked for the 1 kilometer because of airspace. I believe it was airspace or something like that anyways. Oh yeah, so we can take a look at our tasks. So we'll hit the close at the top right here and hit close one more time. And our task should be showing up here. So I'm going to use the pan. I'm not sure if mine is. Oh, I'm way up here, that's why. So here's our task: Rockton with a big 2-kilometer circle, over to Cambridge, Reedsfield, and Peters Corner is back. So you can pan around and just make sure that your task is looking good. I'm going to do one thing here just to make the presentation a bit easier. I'm going to click on Rockton, and I'm going to make it. Oh, that's not right. I guess that's part of the task. Let me try this one more time.
And my screen doesn't look anything at all like yours.
Okay, I think I'm having some technical difficulties with mine. it just died off here.
Well,
This is the Windows version, so it's not quite as robust. But let me just open this up.
I mean, I can't. You can see the turn points at all. I see a lot of zones.
So yeah, what in this case as well, it's showing me in, I don't know, where is that? But somewhere closer to Toronto. It just has, I'm not sure, in the simulator mode, it's not using a GPS, so it just puts you somewhere on that map. So that's why you have to pan. So either use your 2 fingers at once to start the pan, and I have to click and do that, but you can pan over and find Rockton or whatever your home base is.
Actually, this was a bit confusing too, because at first you had us loading Alberta, and now we've got this and Rockton and everything. That's Ontario, so it doesn't.
Oh, sorry. I was wanting you guys to load whatever your base is. Sorry, I said to load Rockton.
Yeah, I'm in Ottawa. My base isn't either SOSA or Cunham, so I just picked Cunham because you were loading it.
Oh, okay. Well, I'd say this generally should work the same way with those. This is going to be obviously a different map and different.
Yeah, I'm looking. I see Three Hills. It's like I know where Three Hills is, and that is not Ontario.
No. Yeah. Sorry. I think when you were catching up there, it must have missed that because I was doing that on this one, but loading Rockton. All right. Let me get back to. No, not that one. So yeah, we'll pan task, make sure that it's set up properly. And yeah, the next one we're going to try the go-to function. And one of the nice things about using the go-to function is that your task will still be in the background ready to go. So if you're getting low on task or something like that, and you want to, in this case, this is showing Alberta close to Drumheller, and I want to have Drumheller in my task, you can set up the go-to, and then later on, if you find a good thermal and get away, you can just resume your task and get back to flying the task.
Sorry, I missed what you did to go to. I was looking away at that.
Yeah, I haven't actually showed you yet, but that's coming up here.
Okay.
So I'll do this on the Rockton one as well. So, oops. So I have to pan here. I have to change. Oops. Yeah, display pan. So let's say I'm around here by Brantford, and I wanted to thinking about landing at Brantford. So I just want to see if I have the glide to make it. So I can click on that. A list of all the things in that keeps. So mine keeps on closing every time I try to do that, and I think that's one of the Windows problems here. So I'm not sure why it's doing that, but I'll do this through the presentation here. Basically, you click on the Drumheller, and then you'll have the option of go to at the bottom. So once you have Drumheller selected, or sorry, Brantford, whatever the term airport is, hit go to, and it'll give you a navigation to that airport.
Sorry,
So
how do you get to go to again?
So you have to, on the map, find an airport and click on the airport. Like just press with your finger on the airport, and then
Okay.
this type of a screen will come up.
Okay.
Select the airport. It'll give you all sorts of different things. Select the airport, and then click the go to at the bottom.
Chris, can it be any turn point? It doesn't necessarily have to be an airport.
Yeah, it could be any turn point. I was kind of using this as an example. As it'll give you a final. Well, I'll give you a final glide to the turn point as well, but
Yeah, which
it's
is
a bit less
typically what you
useful.
want to do. I want to get back home safely. Right.
Yeah.
Typically.
Yeah. So I mean, you can, click on your home airport, and it'll do that. And now we have the go-to in there. We'll to undo it and go back to our proving grounds task that we just programmed in. Open up the menu again. Click the nav, and on the nav twice, and then you'll get the task resume at the top right of your screen. If you click the task resume, then your old proving grounds task will be back in the computer, ready to navigate the task.
I didn't get that. I went back to the main menu, and if I go to nav, and it says task, but it doesn't say task resume.
Just a second.
Click nav again, yeah, and it should. So
Oh, there's another nav. Okay,
show
thank you. Right, another nav menu.
yeah, there's two screens of nav, and then
Now, mine's a little confusing because I have my phone mounted landscape.
yeah, so some things won't be bottom right and all that kind of stuff, but
Exactly. Yeah. So I have to. It takes a little longer for me to find it.
okay. Well, let me know
I
if.
found it.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, now you got your task back. Another functions is alternates. So if you're flying along and it's not going so well, and you want to know if there's any airports close to you, it'll basically bring up a screen with all the close airports. I'll see if my XCSoar will let me do that. So I'll click nav, and then the bottom one's alternates. So yeah, Reeds Field's the closest one in this case for me. But you can just, well, let's say I wanted to go back to, well, let's say Reeds Field. I'll click Reeds Field. This thing keeps on crashing every time I do that. I'm not sure why. Hopefully it works on your devices though.
Hasn't crashed yet.
Yeah. I'm not sure why it's doing that. I think it must
Hopefully,
be.
I don't either.
Must be a bug on the Windows version. But anyways, you can click the go-to at the bottom left, and then it'll give you a final glide bar to wherever you chose that airport.
Yeah, I like that it gives you the frequencies. That's nice.
Yeah, well, that's depending on the waypoint file. I guess the waypoint file has that, but
yeah.
Yeah. So we'll go to the.
Does Puslich Lake go by another name, or are they just not on the file?
I don't think it's on the Pan American file, if that's one you're using, or it depends which file you're using. Yeah. Let me see if it's on this one. I get the feeling it's not. I think it would go by Puslich Lake, but where is that? Yeah, it doesn't look like it's on this one either, so I don't think it's there. All right, it's probably too close to Reeds Field. So anyways, moving on, we'll talk a little about the info boxes. So in sim mode, which you guys should all be in sim mode, they can also control the simulator in different ways. So I'll give you an example. I don't think I put that in here. Yeah, it's simulator. Okay, here's one example. If you click at the altitude, it should come up with a box similar to what you see on the screen there. You can add 10 feet, 100 feet, minus 100 feet. So try clicking add 100 feet and you'll see the final glide bar would move a tiny bit, and it'll also give you, let me do this in an example here. So I'll go to the GPS. I'll start adding a few hundred feet. So yeah, you see the final glide bar is getting lower and lower and lower. So it's not showing a reach, but not sure where that is. Well, never mind, we'll get to this later anyways, but you can also change your ground speed, and then you can actually put your finger on the glider and flick it and it'll start moving. Another function of those info boxes, I'd say they're very customizable. You can, there's all sorts of different options. So if you just click on the info box, you'll get, and then change the info box. Let me show this an example here. So let's say I want to change, yeah, let's change the first one here. This little menu comes up here, and we just click on the switch info box, and then there's, I don't know how many, probably, I don't know, 50 or 60 some different choices. The ones I really like to use finish distance, which is, or final distance, sorry. That will show you your distance around the whole entire task. And in this case, it'll, we're not at Rockton, so it actually gives a distance to Rockton and then the distance around the whole task. I also like to use the height AGL. These ones I leave, the two top on the right there, Alt GPS and the height AGL. I usually leave it. I like to have the AGL. Say it's not, you can't depend on that to the foot. It's just coming from databases of maps, so I wouldn't use that to, you know, I'm definitely at 900 feet, not 800 feet type of thing, but just to give you at least an idea of what your height above ground level, it's quite a useful tool. And I'd say that the topography that they use comes from the .xcm map that we loaded at the start there. So I look around at all those options. There's tons and tons of things, and there's no one correct one to use. So there's all sorts of useful things that you might want to use. I often have a McCready setting set up in there because that has a big effect on your final glide. So you can quickly just click the McCready setting info box, and you can quickly change that if you need to. Well, that's something that I'm gonna let everyone kind of play with later on. We already talked a little bit about the simulator, how to change your altitude. There's no way to stop the glider once it gets moving. Or you have to turn off XCSoar, or at least I don't know any way of getting it to stop. You have to turn off XCSoar if you want to stop. Oh, sorry, no, I lied. There is one way to do that. If you have the V ground, the velocity of the ground speed, I think you can click that and set it down to 0. That's one way to stop the glider if you do want to stop it. There's somebody who's clicking. If you could mute your mic, that would be nice.
I'm not finding ground speed on my display, and I can't find a box for that. So
yeah, then you'll have to actually add the ground speed by, say, clicking the info box, hit the switch info box, and then find the V ground info box and select it.
Yeah, like ground, I see GR average, cruise, GR instantaneous.
I mean, it might be under ground speed. Let me just double check here. I will, well, let's see what that one is. Oops.
It's alphabetical.
Yeah.
That sounds useful, so
This one's not letting me
I'm
change it.
asking.
Okay, switch box. Yeah, speed ground, sorry, is what it is. V ground, speed ground.
Yeah, it helps if you're looking alphabetically in the right place.
Yeah.
Okay, much better.
Okay, another thing that's, let's say when we increase the altitude, you may notice there's a great big circle that comes around the glider. You can see it in this slide. Is that kind of, it's not a perfectly shaped circle, but that's basically your glide reach. That's showing how far you can fly, even your altitude. And that's, of course, with the glider set up properly. So it's kind of a neat information to have. But you know, you can also see the airports when they get in that glide range, they change color, or they have a circle around them depending on your settings. But, we'll get to that stuff later.
Chris?
Yeah.
It's Mike. So is that distance to glide to ground or distance to glide to a deck?
You mean the ring that's around you?
Yes.
That's, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's to your safety. Did I write that in there? I think it's to your safety height. Now the safety height I'm gonna get to that in the settings later on. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that is to your safety height. Well, maybe I shouldn't promise you that. I think I actually write that in the presentation later. I can't remember at the moment. So yeah, I mentioned earlier, you'll notice that airports that you can make it to have purple with a green circle around them. And then they also get a little label that comes up showing how much above glide you are of them. So that in this example, they have Drumheller Municipal is 1,476. Well, you can make it there with 1,476 feet to spare, plus your safety. So if your safety is 1,000 feet, then you'd make it there at 2,476 feet. Of course, that's in a perfect glider in still air and all that. Yeah, depending on your conditions, that might not be true. But if you have it set up properly, that should be generally true. And then, yeah, if you're not in glide, that green circle won't be there, and it won't give you a label saying how high or low you are. Another feature, usually on the left side of the screen, is this final glide bar. So if you're below final glide for the task, you'll be showing kind of orangey red going down. And if you're above, it'll be in green. There's a little bar that I think is on by default in XCSoar. On the left side, you can see it's kind of dashed on the left side. That's on top of the green final glide bar. And that's your final glide to McCready 0. I don't encourage anybody to use that one because using a McCready 0 is usually not a good idea. I don't want to get into McCready theory in this presentation because we have way too much to go over, but there's very few instances where you do want to use a 0 McCready, and I think even displaying that might tempt some people to stretch things a little bit further than they should. So there's a setting to turn it off, and I'll show you how to use that later. I'll show you where to turn that off later. And yeah, setting McCready setting. kind of the basic nav stuff. You can just click on your MacCready. I'll do that in an example here. And up by 1, down by 1, whatever you want. I set it here for 2. Doesn't really, for now, it doesn't really matter, but you certainly, if you're going to be using the final glide calculators, you should have a good idea of MacCready theory and what you're using that for. So if you don't know that, make sure you go to someone at your club who can teach you MacCready theory. Yeah, I already mentioned you can get the sim moving by dragging the airplane and or basically touching the airplane and swiping in the direction you want it to go. When you're kind of playing around, setting things up, practicing the use of it, this can be kind of useful just to see what all the functions look like when they're actually moving. You can't thermal in this, so you can't really see the thermal mode, and it's not the easiest to steer, but it's kind of handy just to see how it works. Well, that was the end of the basic use of XCSoar. There's probably a whole bunch more, but I'm trying to get to the important points. Our next section is the advanced settings. So this is a little bit beyond beginner, but I found every time that I've done the XC course, people want to know what all these settings do and what they mean. So I'm going to go through them all. Well, maybe not all of them, but the ones that are most commonly used.
Chris, before we go any further, could we get everybody to mute their mics and speak yourself?
Yeah, please. I hear some clicking around.
Yeah.
All right, I think everyone's got it there. So we're going to go enter the system menu. And we've already gone into that a bit with the site files. So it's going to be, the start's going to be similar, although we're going to skip over the site file because we've already done it. But the very first thing I want you all to do, if you haven't already done it, is go down and click the expert button at the bottom left, or the expert checkbox, bottom left. And this gives us a bunch more options. Now, probably if you're kind of a beginner, you don't necessarily need these options. But for this exercise, I want to go through, some of them are kind of useful, and it's kind of what the XCSoar developers figure that people are going to use or not. So yeah, I'll start there. So for the most part, we're just going to be going to the next screen. So you can use the bottom arrows at the bottom of the screen. So just click over once for back to this site files, which we've already set up, but just going a little bit more in depth. If you have, let's say someone was asking if there's a Puslinch file or airport in the database, and there's not in the Pan American file, but probably SOSA is going to be using that for contests going forward. So they'll probably give you that file. But if you want to have a secondary file that has airports like Puslinch or other examples like that, you can set that in the more waypoints. Or, I mean, there's all sorts of different reasons why you want more waypoints, but I'd say that's probably the most common one, is you have a separate bunch of airports that you want to file in there. The watched waypoints is, I've never used that, but that's a special file that you have to make that can give you some added features. I can't even remember what they are right now, but I wouldn't say it's terribly useful. And then, of course, we have the more airspaces if you want to do another airspace file. And then waypoint details is another thing, like the watched waypoints, which I've never used, but I guess you can put more details into the waypoints. One of the things, so yeah, it comes up right here. So if you're not sure of what something does, usually you can click on it and a little help button will come up in the bottom left. the XCSoar is all open source, and most of the developers prefer to code and not make help buttons. So it's not always the most useful, but sometimes that might give you at least steer in the right direction. Of course, you can always look up the XCSoar manual, but that's not that much better, to be honest. So I think there are a few options that we're going to go through that I don't even know what the hell they are. But yeah. Anyways, let's go to the next screen, map display orientation. Now, this is, of course, personal preference. Some people always like to have their maps north up, but what I really like is to having, when I'm cruising along, I like to have my track, the track that I'm cruising, showing is up on the screen. But when I'm circling, you don't really want that, because then the screen is going to be spinning the whole, like when I'm thermaling, the screen's going to be spinning the whole time. So if I'm on a task, and it'll basically, with target up, it'll give me the next waypoint will always be at the top. So for example, if I'm on the PG task there, if I'm going SOSA to Cambridge and I get a thermal on the way, it'll keep on showing me Cambridge ahead of me. I'd say I know some people really like north up for that, but it's all your preference. I'll just give you a suggestion of what I like, target up. There's a few other options there that I think are somewhat self-explanatory. The circling zoom, I say that will actually zoom in on you more while you're thermaling, as opposed to when you're in cruise. I actually don't like that myself, but I know some people do. And anyways, I said the two top ones there, the cruise orientation and circling, I think the most important ones that you might want to change. Keep on moving to the next one. I should add that, yeah, if there's any parts of this, please just speak up and ask a question. Elements. I have to remember what the ground track is here, but so the next screen is the elements of the map. And there's all sorts of options there. The defaults are usually pretty good. Trail length, I can't remember what the default is on that. I kind of like full myself, because I can see exactly where I've been on that flight. But if you're going up and down the same area, that can get really distracting. So maybe you want just one of the other options on there. One of the big ones, I like this feature. It's called detour cost markers. My next screen here, I'll display this. So in this example, the glider's target is Acme. So the waypoint they're trying to go to is Acme. And let's pretend that there's a cloud over to the right for this glider, and it's pointing in that direction. So these numbers are basically showing if you go to the 9, let's say in this example, and then to Acme, your total distance to Acme will increase by 9%. So it's one of those things that's kind of nice to know. When you're flying along, you can kind of gauge whether you should make this big deviation to a cloud or not. And it gives you an idea of just how much percentage that's actually increasing your distance. So the next one's map display. Okay, a lot of this stuff is personal preference. How big of a label you want for waypoint, stuff like that. This one's hard to explain, but one of the functions that XCSoar allows is usually when we talk about a final glide, it's kind of from exactly where you are in a straight line to the airport. Let's say we're trying to get back to Rockton. It'll say where you are directly back to Rockton in a straight line. XCSoar has a function. Let's say there was a single mountain in the way between you and Rockton. It will actually make a route for you to go around that single mountain and tell you whether you can go around that mountain or not, and give you a final glide to the point. So it's not terribly useful in Southern Ontario, but it could be useful out here in Alberta. I haven't actually tested that out too much myself, so I'm not sure how well it works, but the function is there. Live light. And oh yeah, so later on there's actually an option to change the, you have to make a different option later on in the menus to actually get that arrival height to work for curved glides. So yeah, a lot of stuff is pretty self-explanatory. The one thing, yeah, the landable symbols. The default is a purple circle for an airport and then a green circle around it if you can make it there. There's a few different choices there. So the manual actually explains that there's red, orange, and green for the traffic lights. So the orange is that you would have the airport in glide, but there's a mountain in the way that's blocking you getting there, or some sort of a terrain thing that's getting in the way. I've actually found that it actually is in the purple circles as well. So you don't have to pick the traffic lights if you want that function. It's actually in the purple as well. I'm not sure about black and white though. So yeah, the next setting screens, we can set up our defaults for whether we want the terrain display and topography display on. So terrain is, let's say, that brownie looking topography type, or sorry, not topography, brownie looking, what do you call that? Ground level type map, which I find it actually makes XCSoar look a little too busy. Actually, I will put an example of that here on the screen. So we'll set this up. I'll do this very quickly. So right now the terrain is on this XCSoar. I'll just turn it off. This one now, it's just showing white for the background. I find that actually a lot easier myself to see rivers and airpoints, and I find it's just less busy on the screen. Even when I'm flying in the mountainous area, I prefer to have the terrain off myself. But I say, if you find it helpful, certainly try it out if you're flying in mountain terrain. I think for flat land, I don't really see much point in having it. You're still going to have all the lakes, rivers, and things like that showing up on the map. So my recommendation is just to leave the terrain display off. Topology, you definitely want to have on. That's all the rivers and lakes and things and roads. And then the other ones are kind of just personal preferences there of how you want to have it look. But the defaults are pretty good. I guess I mentioned that. So this example is talking mostly about Alberta, but in the airspace files that I supplied there, they have airways which start at 12.5 for the most part around Ontario and Alberta. So I recommend, this most of the time on a good day in QNIM we can be flying up at 12.5, but in Ontario that's pretty rare. So I recommend you just clip everything above 12.5. Now in XCSoar, the way this works is if you hit 12.5, they still display. You have to put clip altitude and then 12,400, and that will get rid of all the airways that are kind of making the screen busy. I'll do this on this screen. Big. Oh yeah, sorry, I mentioned the very top option is airspace display. We'll select clip, and then yeah, we'll put in 12.5 or 12.4, sorry, 12,400. And when I'm gonna go back to the map screen on this. Well, you can't really notice that much of a difference, but all the airways are gone on this screen. The one nice thing, if you when you clip it like that, if you somehow happen to get the 12.5 in Ontario, it will still give you a warning of that airspace if it's, well, it has to be set up in the next parts here. I'll show you how to do that, but it can still give you an audible warning saying, hey, you're getting close to the 12.5. Watch your altitude. Do I go into the filters? So yeah, I'm actually going to go into this in the. I didn't get into this in my presentation, but I'll go into the filters and the colors here. Space. So filters, basically we can decide whether we want to be warned about the airspace and also if we want it displayed. So something like Class A, which is, you know, most of Canada that you're going to be flying in is going to be 18,000 above. I mean, most airspace files don't even include Class A, but you probably, you probably wouldn't want it displayed all the time because it'll be all over Ontario, but you might want a warning if there's some chance that you got up to 18,000. With the Class B, you can actually do a similar thing with the airways here, where you can just not display them. If you just click on it once, it gets rid of everything. Click it another time, display, and then warn, and then both. Yeah, where was I? So I know the Class Fs, you might want to have on there as a warning if it's a restricted zone and you don't want to run into them. So it might be better to have that one on as a warning. But Class F, of course, also has the advisory, CYA advisory areas. So some of those warnings might not be needed, but for me, I like to have that on as a warning just because it's easier just to dismiss a warning. And it's better to have, you know, to be dismissing warnings than to accidentally run into a restricted area.
Oh, I'm sorry, how did you get to that screen?
So we start from the airspace screen and we hit filter at the bottom. So this is in our
Thanks.
config. You seeing that?
Yeah, I got it now. Thank you.
And the next one is colors. This one you can color the airspaces however you want. You can make patterns and all sorts of stuff with that to make it easier for you to read. I find it best, you know, you play with those colors however you want them to be, and then you hit close, and then you're back on the map screen and you can see how they
I'm
look.
sorry, could you go back to filter now so I could copy it now that I'm on the screen?
Sure, there's a filter. Now these are just the defaults of XCSoar. I guess I changed one, but I'm not recommending these settings necessarily. These are just the defaults. I'd say I would read through those and decide which ones you find are best for yourself.
Filter was very helpful. Thank you.
No worries. All right. So that's the main things. So yeah, here are the safety factors, which I mentioned a bit earlier. It will show you. So the arrival height is basically, if I'm set up for a glide to, let's say, Rockton, it will, well, in the previous example, it showed me like 1,400 feet above glide. If I have 1,000 feet set in there, I'll actually end up at Rockton at 2,400 feet. So if my glide bar is showing 0, then I should end up at Rockton at 1,000 feet. Of course, again, that's in still air and all that, but that's how it's supposed to work. Terrain heights, so if you're flying around mountains and you need to fly over top of a mountain, that will give you 1,000 feet separation over the mountain. So if I'm trying to, let's say I'm on the other side of the Rocky Mountains, trying to get back to QNIM, that will make sure that I cross the mountains at 1,000 feet. If I can't do that, then it won't show me that I can make QNIM. Height we mentioned. So yeah, there's the alternates mode. You can kind of play around with the selections there. I don't know if I have another slide on that or not.
Excuse me, Chris.
Go ahead.
Question about the arrival height. So for our proving ground tasks at CARS at Rideau Valley, we said we wanted 1,500 feet for finish. Arrive at 1,500 feet. So would we want to set arrival height to 1,500? Is that what we?
Yes, that's a very good question. Because that's actually something that I found kind of maybe not complicated, but it caught me out once. Well, let's give the example. I was flying out of a Freda, and they had a 1,000 foot finish height. So in my task, I actually set up a 1,000 foot finish circle in the task, which I didn't actually show an example of that, but you can actually set that in the tasks. I might show that to you later if I have time. But I also had a 1,000 foot arrival height. I expected that my glide bar would give me basically an arrival. Well, if it was showing 0, then I would get to the end of the finish ring at 1,000 feet for the finish ring plus my 1,000 foot arrival height. What it actually does is it takes the highest of either of those numbers. So in this case, they're both the same, so it brought me to right at 1,000 feet at the end of that finish ring. Now, I was kind of bombing along, and I figured, I'm going to be there at 2,000 feet, and I was like, I started to get just slightly below the glide. I was getting down to about 200 feet below the glide bar, and I expected it to get me there at 1,800 feet. But what it actually was doing was it actually was bringing me back there at 800 feet. So that's something to be very careful about, that you get the highest of either your arrival height in the safety factors or the height of the finish ring.
And interestingly, the highest looks like you can set is 1,000 feet.
Yeah, I don't know why they do that, but because I know especially newer pilots would want, well, even like when I'm flying around the mountains, sometimes I want a little bit more, little more of a safety factor in there. But yeah, I don't know why XCSoar did that. I'm sure they could change that, but they've left it 1,000 is the most you can do. All right, moving on. Glide computer. So yeah, most of these I just leave the default, but the block speed to fly is one that I like myself. The real-time speed to fly, if you have that, you have it off, basically as you change, as the sink that you're flying through or the lift that you're flying through is changing, the speed that's displayed in your speed to fly will change. The speed to fly will be in one of the info boxes that you choose. You have to choose a speed to fly in your info box. Yeah, so if you have block speed fly on, it'll just give you, if you have a 3-knot McCready, it'll basically give you something like, it depends on the glider, of course, but it'll give you 80 knots, let's say. And that's more of the way that I like to fly, but it really depends on how you like to fly. So I know Inga Renner kind of popularized the block speed. Yeah, if you want to use it, then there you go. There's another, yeah, the other options there are pretty, they don't change a lot. There's a wave assistant, which I have never tried in the wave, but I've heard it was still experimental and doesn't work that well. So I'll move on to the Glide Computer Win. There's not much that you necessarily want to change here. If you're, like as in the case of a SOSA pilot, if you're Bluetoothing to the device in the glider, it'll probably have a better wind source because it's using the pneumatic pitot to get your airspeed and ground speed, and it can figure out your wind a bit better. So it would be good to use external wind there. But if you're just using it on your GPS, if you're not hooking up to another device and you're using a GPS in your phone, it figures out the wind just by how you're, when you're thermaling, it sees the drift in the thermals. So I find it actually works quite well, but it's certainly not scientific. It's not going to give you the exact wind. It's something you can use as a guideline, but I wouldn't bet on that wind if your life depends on it. Glide computer route. So this is what I talked about. This is the stuff that will take you around terrain and things like that. So your route mode there, I think it's on default as terrain. And then if you have it on terrain, then you have to remember how this goes. Yeah, if you have to have that reach mode, and the next, well, the box says reach mode, you have to have that on turning if you're going to use it. Otherwise, if you have reach mode on, what's the other option? Straight, I think it is, or whatever. Straight, I think. Then none of that terrain stuff will work. The route climb, it was kind of controversial when it came out among the XCSoar users. Basically, if you have a strong wind and you don't have final glide to an airport, let's say you're going into really strong headwind, you don't have final glide, and it's going to show you how much below final glide you are. With the route climb on, it will also, if you put in a 2-knot McCready, it will expect that you will have to stop in a 2-knot thermal and be blown back by that thermal. And it'll basically expect a 2-knot average. So it will give you a glide reflecting that. Your final glide number will reflect that. If you have that off, then it will basically just show you a straight glide type of how much lower you're going to be, or how much extra height you're going to need to make the airport. Now, there's a big debate amongst a bunch of people of how that should be used, but I turn it off myself. But if you think it makes more sense, then I think you should keep it on. Oh, the reach polar. So I think this is the one that, yeah, this is the one that for the, they call it the glide amoeba, the big circle that's around the glider. It shows how far you can go. This will be set either to your current McCready setting. So if you have 3 set in your McCready, it will give you a glide based on a 3-knot McCready. If there's also a safety McCready, which I think we passed over the safety McCready already, but that's something you can set. I'm not a big fan of using safety McCready myself. You know, if you're setting a 3-knot McCready, you're expecting the conditions to be strong, and therefore the sync will be pretty strong. So using a safety McCready that's you're setting to 0 or 1, you know, it's not really representing the conditions properly. So I don't recommend using anything other than the current McCready setting, but there's the options to do it. But scoring, this is kind of a cool one. You can set up, there's an info box that will give you your current OLC score, or how many kilometers you've flown. And there's also some other pages that will show you that, which I'll show you later. But you can set up the different types of things. If you really want to do a speed OLC, then you can, it'll show you your speed OLC. For myself, I always leave it on the OLC Plus to see how many kilometers I'm getting, how many I'm scored. The predict contest box there, basically it'll tell you, with it off, it will tell you exactly how many kilometers you will be scored OLC to the point that you're at in the flight. When you have it on, it will tell you to the point you're at, plus going back to your takeoff airport. So, you know, if you're flying around the end of the day, kind of, oh, I wonder how much kilometers it'll be when I get home, then yeah, the predict contest will be kind of useful there. But you can also just use it off, have it off, and see how many kilometers you've flown to that point, and then have a direct to or a go-to of your airport, and see how far that is, and just add them together. FAI triangle areas, if you're familiar with the FAI triangle areas, in the OLC you get a bonus for flying an FAI triangle. The OLC actually has a different threshold, or I'll start explaining the triangles. The FAI triangle, the shortest leg of the triangle cannot be less than 28% for 750 kilometers and less triangle. And then everything above that, the shortest triangle, or sorry, the shortest leg of the triangle can be 25%. But the OLC rules are different. So they actually make the threshold 500 kilometers, not 750 kilometers like the FAI rules. So that's going on about. If you're looking to boost your OLC score with an FAI triangle, then it's probably good to have it at the 500 kilometer OLC threshold. And a little yellow triangle, or it's kind of a curved triangle, will show up on your screen if you have the FAI triangles areas on, showing that if you go to that little triangle, you'll get a larger, well, you'll get a FAI triangle based on the previous legs that you've flown in that flight. So that's something that you can experiment with and get higher OLC scores if you're interested in that. All right, so the gauges, this is more if you have other devices hooked up to your, or if you're hooked up to, or Bluetooth to another Vario or FLARM or something like that. I don't know if this, that part, yes, this is just the other gauges. So a FLARM radar, if you're hooked up to a FLARM, show it? Well, should show here later. I think I have a diagram of that later, but I'll get back to that. It can actually show a little radar of, if you're hooked up to a FLARM with your XCSoar device, it'll show you a little radar of all the gliders in your area. It'll also show that in the map screen as well, which is pretty neat. There's also a thermal assistant, which looks like that. Basically shows you kind of in a horizontal plane what's the strongest part of the thermal. I know some people really like that. I don't use it myself, but yeah, some people find it's a great help. And then this is, I mentioned much earlier in the presentation about the final glide bar. There's the, you can just turn it off if you want, but I don't know. I think you would want it on at all points. But they have the McCready 0 final glide bar. I recommend turning that off. But I say that's just because it's rare that you really want to be flying on McCready 0. So that's it for that page. I think I'm a bit late on time here, but I'll try to speed things up here. So there is an option of having a vario. You can see in the screen here, the bottom right, it's actually a graphical vario. And also it can also give you audio. I was actually flying in one of the club gliders the other day with the audio vario wasn't hooked up properly. I had the first flight of it in the season, and we didn't notice that until I was up in the air. So I just pulled out my XCSoar and threw the audio vario on there. Now the audio vario that you get out of XCSoar is completely uncompensated. So every single pull up you get, the vario is going to zip up. But you know, if you're in a pinch, then it's better than nothing. But it's not. Yeah, it's nice to have as a backup if you ever do need it. But you have to go into the settings and turn it on if you did need it. So the defaults, this is more if you're flying in contests, this is very useful. You can set your max start hearts and stuff like that. I'm not going to go deep into that because I think you have to figure that out when you're flying a contest. Similar here. This is like if I'm flying a Canadian contest, it's easiest to just make we always have a 5 kilometer start, 2 kilometer finish, 2 kilometer turn point cylinder. But if I'm trying to do FII tasks, then I'll set that to 1 kilometer start line and finish line and sector turn points for the FII type of tasks. Yeah.
Sorry, Chris.
Yep.
Sorry, but if you don't mind, can we go back to task rules for a moment? Because I just see they also have a finish minimum height in there also.
Yeah, so this is a default. So whenever you make a new task, this will be the default that comes up. And then within the task itself, you can also set the height. So
on any of the turn points, like the finish cylinder.
Yeah. So within, yeah. So yeah, I mean, if you plan to be using this mostly for proving grounds and the height's 1,000 feet or 1,500 feet or whatever it is, then you can just throw 1,500 feet in there. And then every time you make a task, it'll come up with 1,500 feet. And now, of course, you know, make sure that you got AGL or MSL, whatever you're using there.
Right.
I say, yeah, during a contest, if they have a set finish, most contests have set finish heights for the whole contest, so it's useful to throw that in there as well. So look, there's not a lot text size. If you're having trouble reading things on the screen, this is mostly just the buttons and things like that will have a bigger text size. So that might be useful there. Otherwise, there's a few other little settings there. Oh, this is a bit of a bigger topic, which is I might need my other screen for. But so the screen layout. Let's just show the. Let's get back over here. So this is referencing, you know, which. So the first model, first label there is display orientation. So if you always want it to be portrait, then you can always set a portrait or landscape, and that's where you can set that. Or you can set it to the if you have a the gyroscope or whatever it is in the phones, it'll follow your phone, whatever you want. The next part, the info box geometry. So the info boxes are pretty customizable. There's all sorts of different options you can do. This is 4 on top, 4 on the bottom. You can make it 4 on the bottom. You can make it 12 on the bottom. You can make it all sorts of different options. My preference is 4 on the bottom, but that's just what I like to do. Well, yeah, there we go. Yeah, so all sorts of different options there for whatever your preference is. There's also the colored info boxes is a kind of a neat thing if you're if you have a final glide in one of your info boxes and you're getting low, it'll show up in red, and if you're high, it'll show up in green, that type of thing. So it's kind of neat little things like that with colored info boxes. And then, yeah, the inverse info boxes. I think I have an example of that next screen. So yeah, the two different, I find when it's sunny out, it can be much easier to see the black background. So that's my preference, but I think it really depends on your display. I've heard the e-readers, the white background is a little bit easier to read, but it's really what your preference is and whatever you find is the best in the sunlight. Yeah, so I'll move on to the next screen. So right at the start, I showed you when you flick the screen left or right, it just showed info boxes or didn't show the info boxes. So this is this menu, the pages, is where you can customize that. So the two defaults are map info boxes and a map. I made another one here. So you click the add, and everyone can do this along with me. Click the add, and then select main area. It can be map, info boxes, cruise, and the bottom area cross section. I think I have an example of that in the next page. Oh no, I don't. Let me do that on here. And so yeah, the bottom area, we're gonna go with cross section. Now this is useful if you have really complicated airspace, if you're trying to go underneath the Toronto airspace or the Guelph corridor or something like that, or in Calgary if you're trying to go under an airway or something like that. There we go. You can see in this box, it'll show you a kind of a side view of all the airspace that you might be running. And so you can see Kitchener-Waterloo's there, the Toronto's at the top. And it also gives you, so you're basically on the left of the screen, and it gives you that blue glide of what you're going to glide through on your way down. I haven't used this screen that much, but I say if you're flying through complicated airspace, it could be of some help. I say maybe if you're trying to fly over the Kitchener-Waterloo airspace in this Waterloo airspace in this example, you can see if your glide's going to be over top of it. I don't recommend you cutting that one very close, but there's an option there. So yeah, you can make all sorts of different screens. You can make a thermal assistant up there, FLARM radar. So you can just flick to the right and you'll have a FLARM radar. There's a bunch of different combinations you can do, but I'd say you can experiment with that and see what you like. Especially with if you have yours set up to the FLARM, I kind of I like having the FLARM radar on one of the pages. And then the info box sets. So you can set up, you can edit your info boxes on the main screen. I showed you how to do that earlier. But if you, especially when you're in sim mode, you can't change the thermal boxes. What you have, so the info boxes will change depending on your settings, but they will change to the circling boxes when you're thermaling, and it just detects when you're circling, basically. So you can set up the different info box choices. I like to have like one of the really useful ones I like to have is the average thermal. It gives you the average right from when you started circling to where you are at that moment. So you can kind of see whether it's worth, well, I find it gives me a better picture of whether I want to stick with that thermal or not. I know some of the new Varios also have that function, but most of the older Varios just have a 30-second average, not from a bottom right to where you are. So yeah, there's also whether you like to use a different set of info boxes when you're on Final Glide. There's an option whether you can just use the regular cruise or you can use the Final Glide boxes. I don't like using the Final Glide, but that's really, if you would like to see different information in Final Glide, that's all up to you. So yeah, that's something that you'll want to play with and experiment with, and you can follow along with my presentation, the PDF presentation, for playing with that a bit more. But I want to get moving through this stuff, so we'll get going here. So the next page was their setup for the logger. So the XCSoar has a logger that will log your flight, that you can upload the file to the OLC or other programs like that. But the OLC will give you a validated trace. It's not the same as an FAI logger. They differentiate between that, but you will be scored on the OLC when you put your flight on there. So in the logger, in the IGC file that it outputs, you can set your name in there. So just throw your name in the pilot name box there, and then you can also set up the recording parameters. Since storage is pretty cheap these days and big, I just put it at the minimum of 1 second on both the cruise and circling. So it gives you a bit of higher resolution of your flight if you ever want to watch it and see you or something like that. The other options there, I just leave the default auto logger on, and the other ones, it doesn't really matter. Oh, the logger ID. That's for people who've used XCSoar before and used their files. They'll notice that the file is named, basically gives you the date of the flight at the start. The file name gives you the date of the flight, and then it'll actually, I think it's an X it gives you for XCSoar for the code of the name, and then it gives you 3 A's in the file name. That's just the default of XCSoar. If you want to change those 3 A's in the IGC file name to something more unique, so you can find your IGC file easier, just put in I would put in like my initials CMG in the logger ID there, so it's easier to find my file later on and differentiate between someone else's XCSoar file. But it has to be 3 digits. So the units, actually this is, I already went over this stuff, so we've already seen the units. So let's move on from there. Tracking, XCSoar has a means of tracking if you have a data connection. So it's mostly applicable to phones, or if you have a tablet with data on it. You have to sign up at skylines.aero or livetrack24.com. And then you just have to put your login information there. You can put down how many times, how often you want your position sent out. But it's kind of like having a spot tracker or something like that. And it's for free, but it will use your data on your phone. So if you have a big data plan, then it probably doesn't matter. But if you don't have much of a data plan, then maybe you don't want to have that going on. And it also, this will take a little bit more battery life from your device. So if you're concerned about that, you might not want to have that on. But it certainly can be a really great safety tool. So if you go missing, we'll at least know an area where to find you if you don't have any other kind of a device like a Spot or an ELT or anything like that. So it can be a great safety tool. And I encourage people to use it if they have the data. All right, so that's the end of the config, or the main settings there. The one that we have missed is we have to set up the airplane that we're actually using in XCSoar, so we have the correct polar set into the flight computer. So we'll basically go back to, let's do this along with you here because I missed a step here. So we'll go back to our main menu, we'll go to config, and then plane. Now it'll set up. It'll be blank if you haven't set anything up yet, and we'll hit new. And I'm gonna write our DG1000 at QNIM here. So it's NIM is the registration. You can put it in like C-G NIM as well if you want, but I'm just gonna put NIM in for now. Contest ID, I'm just gonna leave blank for now. So the important thing that you wanna do here is set your polar. So you click the polar button, and it gives you another box here. And then it actually has a list of all sorts of common gliders. So go down to the box there and click list. And it'll give you a big list of all the different gliders that are set up. So I'm going to put in the DG1000. It has basically, it has an assumed weight based on whether you're just a single pilot or you have a passenger with you. So let's say I'm going to fly with a passenger today, so I'm going to put 20 meter with passenger. I'd say the only thing that affects is the weight, the assumed empty weight of the glider. And then select it and hit OK. And now you have a polar in there. And we'll hit OK again. Oh, it doesn't let me activate right now. So yeah, OK, here it goes. If we click it again, we can activate this one. So it'll activate the polar. You hit yes, and it'll give you a little mark active. I'm going to make one more plane just to show you how to switch the active. So I'll do ZXC, which is our DG300 at QNIM. So I'm going to list here and scroll down to find the DG300. Select it and press OK. So now we have two different gliders set up here. If I'm flying the DG300 today, I'll click that, hit activate. Oh, I thought you actually can see. I guess it kicks you out here. But if we go back to the plane menu, we'll look at ZXC, and it says active next to it, so we know that that one's active. If your glider is not in the list of polars, there is a way that you can make custom polars. But to be honest, it's much easier just to find a glider that's similar to yours, so similar appearance, performance, and just use that. But yeah, if you're really keen to make one, there is a possibility to do it. So yeah, I already did it along with you guys. So yeah, if you're hooked up to, if you want to hook up to, let's say a Bluetooth device like in the SOSA planes, this is basically how we're going to do this. So we're going to go back to, well, yeah, I'll start with the basics. So there are all sorts of different ways you can hook up your devices to Varios or FLARMs or other devices, flight computers. So there's the kind of advantages of hooking up to a Vario is that if the Vario usually has a pitot input, so you'll get more accurate winds than with the flight computers. And you know, hooking up to a FLARM, you can actually display all the FLARM targets on your moving map display, which can be kind of neat. It also it can give you the climb rates of various gliders. So if you see somebody has a 5-knot thermal and you're only in a 2-knot thermal and they're not too far from you, you can bump over and join them based on the FLARM. I think I have a picture of it. Yeah, so this is how they display in the TH. So the contest letter, if you have the proper file set up, if you're registered on FLARMnet and you need to download a FLARMnet file, which you can download from the FLARMnet.net.org website there, which there's a clickable link if you go to the PDF. You can download the FLARMnet file. You can throw that to your XCSoar file, and it'll also give you the competition letter. So I can see, you know, if I could see Echo Hotel, I can go see them right on my screen if they're all registered and you have the file set up. So the different ways to set up, you can do the Bluetooth like what SOSA has, which I think is great for club gliders. We had plans to get QNIM doing that, but we have a bunch of other things that we've been working on first, but eventually we'll be doing that. There's also a wired connection you can do. We call it a yo-yo board. IOIO is pronounced yo-yo, which it takes a bit of tinkering. You can buy fully made kits as well from a guy in Finland, and the links there at Soartronic. But most clubs have a tech geek who can probably help you out with that if you do want to do a wired connection to your own glider. So when you want to hook up to that device, say this is probably going to be most towards the SOSA pilots who are going to be hooking up to the Bluetooth in the club gliders. First, you of course make sure that your Bluetooth is on, and I think depending on the device, you might need to actually select the device in your Bluetooth settings of the phone, and then you'll have to come to this menu, which is under the config, setup, and then devices, and actually select the device. You have to set up a driver for the device as well. So if you're using an LX device, you'll have to set up LX in there, or there's a FLARM. If you're directly to a FLARM, you'll have to set up the connection to that device, or through the driver for that device. And it can get pretty somewhat complicated, but yes, I recommend you talk to your tech gurus at your clubs if you're having troubles with that. We'll move on from that. So yeah, one of the other boxes in the config menu is the flight. Here, if you're carrying water ballast, this is the area where you'll put water ballast in. Also, you can set up a bugs setting. So if you have a whole bunch of flies today at QNIM, we had a whole bunch of flies at our DG1000, and I probably would be setting a slight bug. But basically, that just it decreases your polar by the set amount. What would be set in there? If you're connecting to outside devices via Bluetooth or the other connections, you can actually set the QNH to get the barrel altitude set to the displaying, or sorry, in the info boxes, you can display the barometric altitude, and you can set up the QNH in that way. Just slave it to your altimeter. And I can't remember what the temp actually does there, but there's a option. And then there's a manual, well, there's a wind setting as well. So you can, if you don't like the wind that's showing up on your device, if you think it's way off, and I've had that a couple times where it's shown like 40 knots when it's not more than 10 knots. And it's just the problem with when you're circling, it's just not picking up the wind properly. So you can set an external wind yourself using the direction pad there. So you can turn off the auto wind and set a manual wind if you want. But I'd say that's you probably only use that if it's just way off and you think it's all wrong. So that's actually most of the settings that you can set up there. I made a little checklist of things to check before you go flying. So make sure your polar is set. I say if you're following along with my PDF, you can click on these things. It'll take you to the page where that's set up. So set your quick polar, water ballast if you're using water ballast. Site files, you always want to make sure that you have the right map files, turn point files, and airspace files. You know, if you're going to a contest or you're going to a different site, you're probably going to set this up, at the start there. It shouldn't change, but you might want to just double check that everything's set up properly. If you're doing a task, make sure that it's programmed in and the proper waypoint sectors. So make sure you have 2 kilometers in for most people in the proving grounds, or if you're doing an FAI task, make sure that you have half-kilometer cylinders or sectors for FAI tasks. You want to double check your arrival and safety heights. Yeah, that's about it. And if you are hooked up to a device, make sure that that is properly set up. When you hook up to a device, in that device's menu, it will give you a little box underneath saying that you are properly hooked up, or that you're connected. It'll say, if you're hooked up to a FLARM, it should say connect, receiving FLARM data, or something like that. Anyways, it'll say FLARM under there anyways, saying that you are connected to that, or saying that you're connected to a barrel or whatever it is. All right, so that's the end of that section. I'm sure there's gonna be some questions. Let me just answer the questions in a second. I'm just gonna mention a couple of quick things. So XCSoar and Condor, you can hook up if you're a Condor user. I'm not a Condor user myself, so I can't really tell you that much about it. But if you want to practice using XCSoar in Condor, that is possible. And if you go to the Condor the Condor website, they have some tutorials of how to do that. And then it's a good way, if it's the first time using XCSoar, it's a good way to practice using XCSoar before you have to use it in an airplane and get distracted by it. So I have a whole bunch of links here to different manuals, airspace, waypoints, and all that kind of stuff here. Yeah, the FLARM links, and different, the Open Vario project. If you're really crafty, you can make your own flight computer. The one thing I'm going to mention here is Top Hat storing. Top Hat storing is a fork of XCSoar, so it's has a very it's based on XCSoar, but it has a slightly different user interface. And certainly I've heard from well, beginners and advanced users that they prefer the interface of that a little bit better. It's a little bit simpler, so you lose out some features. But if you're just doing very simple tasks, well, I know that some of the people who are using this are doing pretty complicated tasks, so I don't think it's just for beginner users, but some people might find it a bit easier to navigate around the user interface with that. I know one of the nice things that it has is an on-screen menu button, so you don't always have to double-click the screen to get the menu come up. You just press the little menu button on the screen. Yeah, so now I'll take questions. See the chat's coming up. So yeah, someone's asking better viewing. So I went over the devices better viewing, but yeah, it really depends on the screen whether polarized sunglasses will work or not. I mean, just bring your sunglasses along and check that out. But one of the things that I've seen done, if you're having a tough time reading, is you can make kind of a hood for the device you're using for the backlit screens, so it can shade off some of that sun that's coming in there. So that's one suggestion. Yeah, I don't have a. I guess that's my biggest one. But you can also get some screen filters as well that go on the screen. I don't have any experience with them myself, but that might be a try. There's always a fella asked me about the devices. He was asking me my advice on a device, and he found a cheap Android, brand new Android device in a store. And actually, I don't particularly recommend them because usually the cheap Android devices have the cheaper screens and things like that. It's better to, if you're searching for a device, to look for one of the old, like top of the line phones that people are selling on Kijiji. I've bought recently a Samsung Note 4, or was that? Yeah, Note 4, something like that. Anyways, it was a couple $100 at the time, and it's got a larger screen, and it also has pretty good sunlight readability. And the Note 4 I also liked because it has a removable battery. So you can buy a used one, just pull the battery out and buy a new one off Amazon. I think it was $10 for the new battery. So that's one of my suggestions. I see someone's asking if anybody's using SteveFly Vario. I'm very interested in one. I think that's really, really neat, but I have never used one, and I haven't used it myself. Screen gestures, yes. XCSoar has a bunch of different screen gestures. I can't remember them all. I always forget them myself when I'm using XCSoar, so I end up not using them that much. But let me go back to my XCSoar, the main map screen, and I'll just flip over. I remember an L does something here. Yeah, so the L gives us a backwards L. If you make the gesture of the screen, gives you a whole bunch of alternates. Like a forwards L gives you, yeah, okay. That gives you a list of waypoints, and you can quickly just go to that. To go through the manual, I remember there's one that gets panned quickly. But okay, those are the two ones I remember. But in the manual, it has more of the screen gestures. I say for myself, I forget them all when I'm flying, but I certainly recommend that you go through the manual and check all those out. Oh, well, Tom's saying he has SteveFly in his ASW19. Do you like it? Maybe you can unmute and tell us a little bit about it. I'm actually quite curious.
Got to figure out how to unmute. It's
Okay.
taken a little bit to set it up. Finally, we got it right. It had a bad audio board, but it has the SteveFly in it with the pitot total energy and static board on it as well. It seems to work very well, getting similar readings to what the Cambridge is giving us.
Do you use the Vario in it?
No, I tend to use the Cambridge as the main Vario, but it's echoing the same that I'm seeing on the Cambridge using its own pneumatic sensors. So quite interestingly, it's pretty damn accurate.
Okay, neat. Yeah, and you find the sunlight readability pretty good on that thing?
Absolutely, fantastically readable in the sunlight. The biggest issue is figuring out the control knobs, etc. The XRF files, whichever stuff you didn't even touch on earlier on. All the control inputs. I've got
yeah, of course, the SteveFly doesn't have a touch screen, so it's
no, it doesn't have a touch screen. I don't think you can do a touch screen sitting on an instrument panel. Your fingers will be all over the place.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's getting there. It's taken about a year to figure out, and it's nice.
Yes, I've been thinking about one myself, but haven't pulled the trigger.
I can try and share a picture of it in the cockpit if I can figure that out.
Yeah, the one thing I do like about having I use a phone is that it's very portable and easy to. If you're going between different gliders, of course, it's the only way to go. But I was in Australia this winter, and although it was during the smoky time and it wasn't the greatest gliding, but I could just bring the device that I always use in all gliders with me to Australia. So that's kind of a nice thing about having the portability of that. But certainly the SteveFly has a bigger screen and a much easier to read screen. So there's kind of pros and cons to both there.
I was using the Android phone as well as the black and white Kobo in Namibia as a backup in the back of the Arcus.
Oh yeah.
So and they both work. The Kobo is just slow. The processor is not very fast, but the readability of that is stunning.
Yeah, I played with the Kobo a little bit, but it's a bit more to set it up, so it's not quite as simple as just using a phone. But yeah, I don't know. There's certainly options to put XCSoar on there if you want. All right. Do we have any other questions? All right. So thank you. All right. Well, that is all. I don't know if our administrators have to say anything, but otherwise, I'll just be saying goodbye and ending the session here.
Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you all.
Great presentation.
Cheers.
Yes, extremely helpful. Thank you, Chris.
Cheers.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Right.